The Galactic Academy was a place where the young and the brave from across the stars came to learn the art of peace and war. It was filled with every kind of being. Creatures with scales, feathers, metal limbs, and glowing eyes. They all walked the same halls, ate in the same mess hall, and studied under the same flag of unity. But unity was only a word. The truth was far less perfect. On that day, the mess hall buzzed with noise and laughter, plates clattering and voices echoing off the metal walls. Then, all at once, the sound died as a silver tray hit the floor with a sharp clang. At the center of the silence stood Karen, a young Lunari girl whose silver skin shimmered faintly under the white lights. She was small, quiet, and gentle, a first-year cadet trying to survive in a place where strength meant respect. Her glowing blue eyes flickered with fear as 3 Kragath cadets surrounded her. The Kragaths were tall, broad, and built like living tanks, their scaled hides gleaming under the lights. One of them, Zorak, leaned close, his tusks glinting as he smirked. He had knocked her tray from her hands just to see her flinch. "Pick it up," he said, his deep voice rumbling like thunder. "You dropped your dinner. Or do your kind prefer to crawl?" His friends laughed, cruel and sharp. Karen froze. The other cadets in the hall pretended not to notice. Some lowered their heads, others kept eating, but no one moved to help. No one wanted to get in the way of Kragath bullies. They were known for their tempers and for how easily they broke bones. Karen's trembling hands reached for the food scattered across the floor. The laughter grew louder. Zora kicked a piece of bread across the tiles. "Eat it," he sneered. "Show us how Lunari live." Her heart pounded painfully as humiliation burned in her chest. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the cold metal beneath her knees. But as her fingers touched the floor, another sound cut through the room. A sharp scrape of a chair being pushed back. The laughter stopped. A human cadet was standing. He was average in height, wearing the same black academy uniform as everyone else. His name was Jack Rayner, a Terran from a small colony world that had only joined the Galactic Alliance a few decades ago. Humans were still new to the stars, but they had already earned a reputation for being unpredictable. Jack's dark eyes locked on Zorak. "Pick it up," he said quietly. The Kragath blinked, confused. "What did you say?" Jack stepped forward, his tone still calm but cold as ice. "You made the mess. Pick it up and apologize." The crowd stared, shocked. No one ever talked to Kragaths that way. Zorak bared his teeth, his claws flexing. "Stay out of this, human. You don't want to get hurt." Jack didn't move. "You can try." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then with a snarl, Zorak swung. The Kragath's massive fist cut through the air, but Jack ducked, grabbed the creature's arm, and twisted. The move was fast, practiced, and brutally efficient. Zorak crashed into a table, sending trays flying. Gasps filled the room. One of the other Kragaths lunged, but Jack sidestepped, slammed his elbow into the alien's gut, and drove his knee upward. The second Kragath fell with a roar. The third hesitated, then charged. Jack caught a serving tray from the floor and smashed it across the alien's face. The metal bent in half. Silence followed. The bullies stumbled back, dazed and bleeding. Jack stood over them, breathing hard, his knuckles bruised. "You done?" he asked quietly. No one answered. The Kragaths turned and limped away, growling in anger and shame. Jack bent down, lifted Karen's tray and placed it on the table. "Next time, tell them to clean it up," he said simply. Then he walked away, leaving the entire hall in stunned silence. That was the day everyone in the academy learned 2 things. That humans might be small, but they were dangerous, and that Jack Rayner was not someone you wanted to test. The fight in the mess hall became the talk of the entire Galactic Academy. Word spread fast through the corridors and training grounds, whispered in every language and tone. Some called Jack Rayner a fool for standing up to the Kragaths. Others called him brave. But the truth was, his act had changed something deep inside the academy. For the first time, a human had challenged the most feared species among the cadets, and won. The Kragaths didn't take humiliation lightly. Their culture was built on pride, dominance, and vengeance. To them, being defeated by a human, especially one who had only just joined the stars, was an open wound that needed blood to heal. Zorak, the Kragath leader, swore an oath to make Jack pay. He and his clan brothers began spreading rumors, waiting for their chance to strike back. Meanwhile, Jack was suspended from the academy for a week. The officials said violence wasn't tolerated, even if it was self-defense. He didn't argue. He spent his suspension repairing old training drones and fixing small machines in the hangar bay. He liked working with his hands. It kept his mind quiet. Karen came to see him once during that week. She stood at the hangar door, her glowing eyes dim with guilt. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly. "They'll come after you now." Jack didn't look up from the broken drone he was fixing. "They were already coming after someone," he replied. "Better me than you." She wanted to say more, but the words wouldn't come. In that moment, she understood something about humans that most other species didn't. They didn't fight for power or pride. They fought because it was the right thing to do. When Jack returned to class, things were different. The Kragaths watched him with hatred, but from a distance. Some of the smaller species, the ones who had always kept quiet, nodded to him in the halls. He didn't respond much, but the small gestures didn't go unnoticed. Yet trouble was brewing far beyond the academy walls. The Kragath Empire had been growing restless. They had long seen the Galactic Alliance as weak and divided. The story of a human defeating a Kragath warrior was an insult they couldn't ignore. Within weeks, political tensions grew into threats, and threats turned into attacks. Outposts near the border worlds were raided. Colonies went silent. The Alliance tried to negotiate, but the Kragaths wanted war. They saw it as a way to prove their strength, to erase the shame brought upon them. The academy soon became a war center. Cadets were trained not just for study, but for battle. Jack was transferred to the Terran Defense Fleet, a branch made up of human soldiers and engineers who were still earning their place among the stars. Humanity had never faced a full-scale galactic war before, but they were quick learners. They built ships from scraps, reprogrammed old weapons, and studied their enemies day and night. The other species of the Alliance had advanced technology and powerful fleets, but they lacked one thing humans had in abundance: pure determination. Jack rose quickly through the ranks. His quick thinking and calm leadership during training battles earned him command of a small strike team aboard a ship called the Valiant. Karen was also assigned to the fleet, serving as a communications officer. When she saw Jack again, he smiled faintly and said, "Guess we're in this together now." She returned the smile, though fear lingered behind her eyes. They both knew what was coming. The first true war between the Kragath Empire and the Galactic Alliance was about to begin, and humanity, still considered new, small, and untested, was right at the center of it. The day the first Kragath warships appeared on the horizon of the stars, every human soldier remembered the same thing Jack had once said: "You don't let bullies win." The war began like a storm that no one could stop. One moment the stars were peaceful and bright. The next they were burning. The Kragath Empire attacked without mercy, their massive warships darkening entire sectors of space. Planets fell one after another as their plasma cannons reduced cities to dust. The Galactic Alliance scrambled to defend its borders, but the Kragath fleet was unlike anything they had faced before. Their ships were enormous, built like floating fortresses, covered in armor thick enough to survive direct hits. Even the strongest Alliance fleet struggled to make a dent. On the front lines, aboard the USS Valiant, Jack Rayner stood on the bridge, staring at the chaos beyond the glass viewport. The darkness of space was alive with fire. Streaks of laser beams burning ships and explosions that bloomed like suns. Every time a friendly ship went silent on the radar, Jack felt a knot tighten in his chest. "Shields at 40%, shouted Lieutenant Morgan from the control console. "We can't take another hit like that." Jack's voice was calm, but his jaw was clenched. "Then we don't take hits. We make them miss." The crew moved fast, their faces lit by the red emergency lights that flashed across the bridge. The Valiant was smaller than most enemy ships, but that was humanity's edge. Human ships weren't built for brute strength. They were built for adaptability. They could twist, dodge, and strike from angles the heavier Kragath ships could never manage. Jack ordered the pilot to dive beneath the enemy formation, weaving between burning wrecks. The ship shook violently as shockwaves rolled over its hull. "Target the engines on that destroyer," he barked. "Forget the cannons, cut off their legs." A moment later, the Valiant's railguns roared. Blue bolts of energy lanced through the void, striking the Kragath destroyer's rear engines. The massive ship shuddered, its lights flickering before spinning out of formation. Cheers erupted across the bridge, but Jack didn't smile. He knew this was only one battle in a war they weren't ready for. Then a familiar voice crackled over the comms. "Jack, it's Karen. I've got enemy readings on your right flank. They're closing fast." Her voice carried urgency, but also something else: fear. She was stationed aboard the Aurora Dawn, one of the Alliance's command ships. Jack's eyes darted to the radar, where 3 new enemy ships appeared like predators circling their prey. "Acknowledged," he said quickly. "We'll handle it. Stay clear of their firing line." "You can't handle all 3, she protested. Jack gave a short, humorless laugh. "You forget who you're talking to." He cut the channel and ordered the Valiant into a sharp turn. Plasma blasts streaked past them, grazing the shields and lighting the hull in orange light. "Morgan, vent the fuel cells," Jack said suddenly. "What, that'll cut our speed?" "Do it," Jack insisted. The lieutenant obeyed. A trail of burning vapor streamed from the Valiant, and as the Kragath ships closed in for the kill, Jack triggered the ignition. The vapor exploded into a blinding fireball, engulfing 2 of the enemy ships in flames. The third was thrown off course, spinning into debris. The bridge erupted in cheers again, but this time, Karin's voice returned over the comms, soft and full of disbelief. "You're insane, Jack Rayner." "Maybe," he replied, "but it worked." Outside, the battle still raged, stretching across the stars like a nightmare. Thousands of ships fought and thousands more died. But among all that chaos, one small Terran vessel kept moving, striking faster and smarter than anyone expected. The Kragaths had power, but humans had something deeper, the will to fight even when victory seemed impossible. And though the galaxy trembled under the shadow of war, whispers began to spread among the fleets of every species. They spoke of a human ship that refused to die, of a captain who laughed in the face of defeat, and of a crew who fought not for glory, but for survival. The legend of the Valiant had begun, and so had the rise of humanity's name among the stars. After weeks of brutal battles, the war had reached a breaking point. The Kragath Empire's forces were pressing harder every day, their fleet spreading like fire through the outer systems. The Galactic Alliance had suffered heavy losses, and many worlds were on the brink of falling. Every meeting among the commanders ended the same way, with arguments, frustration, and no real answers. On the moon of Threxos, the Alliance held a final emergency council inside a massive war dome, filled with holographic maps and tired faces. The air smelled of smoke and oil, a reminder that even this base was only one strike away from destruction. Jack Rayner stood among them, wearing the dark uniform of the Terran Defense Fleet, his face shadowed by exhaustion. He had seen too many ships burn, too many good people lost. Karin was there too, standing near the comms station, her silver skin dim under the flickering lights. She listened quietly as the higher-ranking officers argued. "We can't hold them any longer," said a Trinari admiral, slamming his hand on the table. "Their main fleet will reach Threxos within hours. If we stay, we die." A Krillian strategist hissed in reply, his insect-like eyes narrowing. "Retreat is cowardice. If we fall back again, the Empire will crush the next system with no resistance." The debate went on endlessly until Jack finally spoke, his voice calm, but strong enough to cut through the noise. "You're all thinking the same way they do," he said. "That's why they keep winning." Every eye turned toward him. "Explain yourself, human," the Trinari admiral demanded. Jack walked closer to the holomap. It showed the Kragath flagship, the Obsidian Fist, and its escort fleet moving toward the Alliance's position. "You're trying to outgun them," Jack said. "You won't. Their weapons are stronger, their ships are thicker, and they have more numbers than we can count. But we can make them destroy themselves." He pointed to the map, to the glowing sphere of Threxos. "The planet's core is unstable. It's been that way for decades. If we lure their flagship close enough and overload the gravity field generators on the surface, we can trigger a chain reaction in the core. The explosion would destroy the gravity cannon and tear their fleet apart." The room fell silent. One of the scientists blinked in disbelief. "That would destroy Threxos completely. You're suggesting we blow up the moon?" Jack nodded. "Yes." Murmurs filled the room. Some called it madness, others called it impossible. But deep down, everyone knew they had no other choice. The Kragaths were too powerful to beat head-on. This was the only plan that might save them. "Who will lead the strike?" someone asked. Jack didn't hesitate. "The Valiant will. We'll take the lead and guide the Kragath flagship into the trap." Karin stepped forward, her voice trembling. "That's suicide. The gravity field will crush anything near it." Jack met her eyes and gave a faint smile. "Only if we miss the timing." There was a long silence before the Trinari admiral finally said, "Then it's decided. Operation. What do you call it?" Jack thought for a moment, then replied softly, "Operation Not Today." The name spread through the war dome, whispered among the soldiers like a spark of hope in the dark. They began preparing immediately. Engineers worked through the night to arm the Valiant with experimental drives and modified shields that could survive the planet's deadly pull for a few minutes. Karin helped coordinate the Alliance ships, ensuring the communication lines stayed secure. Outside, the stars glimmered coldly, as if watching in silence. When dawn came to Threxos, Jack stood by the viewport, staring at the distant Kragath fleet approaching like a wall of fire. His crew waited behind him, ready for whatever came next. "They think we'll run," Jack said quietly. "Let's show them they're wrong." With that, the Valiant powered its engines and turned toward the enemy. The time for plans was over. The time for courage had begun. The day of the final battle arrived with the weight of destiny. Space above Threxos burned with fire as fleets from both sides clashed in a storm of light and death. The void was alive with chaos, blazing energy trails, broken ships drifting like corpses, and explosions that lit up the black sky. At the center of it all, the USS Valiant led the charge, its hull scorched and armor cracked, but its spirit unbroken. Jack Rayner stood on the command deck, his eyes locked on the massive shape ahead. The Kragath flagship. Obsidian Fist. It was a monster of metal, larger than a city, armed with the terrible gravity cannon that had already destroyed 3 worlds. The Alliance fleet was falling apart under its power, and the entire mission now rested on one small human ship. "We're taking heavy fire," shouted Lieutenant Morgan, gripping the console as sparks flew. "Shields are gone, engines overheating." "Hold the line," Jack ordered. His voice was steady, even as the ship shook violently. "Stay on course. We draw them in no matter what." The crew obeyed without hesitation. They had followed Jack through impossible battles before, and they trusted him completely. Around them, enemy fire streaked past like falling stars. The Valiant darted between wrecks, weaving through debris and plasma fields as the giant Kragath warship followed, roaring across the void like a beast chasing its prey. Karen's voice came through the comms from the command ship.
"Jack, you're too close!"
"You have to pull back now." Jack's jaw tightened. "Negative. They're locked on us. We've got their full attention. You'll never make it out if you trigger the core," she cried. Jack smiled faintly, though his eyes were filled with calm sadness. "Someone has to make sure it goes off." The words hit Karen like a blade. She understood what he meant, but there was no time to argue. The Kragath flagship opened fire again, and a direct hit slammed into the Valiant's right side. Metal tore, alarms screamed, and smoke filled the bridge. "Main reactor's failing," Morgan shouted. "We can't take another hit." "Then we don't get hit again," Jack said, gripping the controls. "Prepare the manual override." The ship dove lower, skimming the upper atmosphere of Threxos. The planet's gravity field pulled hard, dragging both ships toward its surface. The Kragaths, blinded by fury, kept firing, unaware they were flying straight into the trap. Karen's voice broke through again, softer this time. "Jack, please, don't do this." He paused for a heartbeat, remembering that moment in the mess hall when she had been forced to kneel on the floor. The anger, the helplessness, the fire that had sparked in him then. It burned even brighter now. "Karen," he said quietly, "you don't let Bullies win." Then he gave the final command. "All hands abandon ship." The order cut through the chaos. The crew hesitated, but Morgan nodded, understanding. "You're not coming with us, are you?" "Not this time," Jack said. "Go, that's an order." One by one, the escape pods launched, streaking away into space like tiny sparks. Alone now, Jack sat at the helm, staring at the massive shadow of the Obsidian Fist closing in. Warning lights flashed red, and the planet's surface glowed with unstable energy. The gravity field had reached its peak. Jack took a deep breath and whispered the words that had carried him through every battle. "Not today." He pushed the controls forward, sending the Valiant straight into the heart of the Kragath flagship. The collision unleashed a blinding explosion that tore across the sky. The unstable core of Threxos reacted instantly, imploding in a burst of light that swallowed both ships. The shockwaves spread through the system, ripping through the enemy fleet and shattering the gravity cannon into dust. When the light faded, all that was left was silence and drifting debris. The Kragath armada was gone, the Valiant was gone, and the war at last was over. Karen watched from her ship's viewport, tears in her glowing eyes as the last light of the explosion faded. She whispered to the empty stars, "Not today, Jack, not ever." The war finally ended, leaving the galaxy scarred but alive. The Kragath Empire, once feared across the stars, was broken. Their fleets were scattered, their leaders gone, and their pride shattered beyond repair. News of the victory spread quickly through every world of the Galactic Alliance. For the first time in many years, there was peace. Yet behind that peace was a heavy silence, the kind that follows great loss. The name on everyone's lips was Jack Rayner, the human captain who had led the Valiant into the heart of the Kragath flagship and sacrificed everything to end the war. His ship was gone, his body never found. But his story had already become something greater than life, a legend that echoed across the stars. Weeks after the final battle, The Galactic Academy reopened its halls. It stood rebuilt, brighter and stronger, filled once again with cadets from every race and world. But something about it had changed. The students walked with more respect, more unity. On the main floor of the Academy's grand hall stood a new statue made of bronze and steel. It showed a human figure standing tall, one hand holding a flag and the other clenched at his side, his face turned toward the stars. Below it, engraved in shining letters, were the words, "One human said, not today." Karen stood before the statue, her silver eyes reflecting the light. Her heart ached as she looked up at it, remembering the boy who had once stood up for her when no one else dared. She remembered the way he had spoken so calmly to the Kragaths, the way he had fought without hesitation, and the way he had smiled just before flying into the jaws of death. She reached out and touched the cold metal base of the statue. "You kept your word," she whispered softly. Around her, other cadets gathered, listening quietly as she began to speak about him. She told them how Jack had refused to let cruelty win, how he had turned humiliation into courage, and how he had reminded everyone that honor was not about strength or species. It was about standing up when it mattered most. Her voice carried through the hall, and by the time she finished, there wasn't a single sound except the hum of distant engines. From that day forward, the story of Jack Rayner became a lesson for every student at the Academy. They called it the Valiant Code, a simple rule that said no one, no matter how small or weak, should ever be left to face injustice alone. Even the Kragath survivors, those who had once followed their empire blindly, began to change. They rebuilt their worlds and joined the Alliance as allies, their leaders admitting that a single human had taught them humility through sacrifice. Years passed, but the legend only grew. Children across planets studied his life in history lessons. Soldiers painted the words "Not Today" on their armor before going into battle. Pilots named their ships after him, and among the stars, where the ruins of Threxo still floated as silent witnesses to his final act, travelers sometimes claimed to see a faint light moving through the debris, a single spark that flickered like the engine flare of a ship that refused to die. Karen became an officer in the new Terran fleet, dedicated to the same ideals Jack had lived for. Whenever fear rose in her heart, she would whisper his words and feel courage return. She often visited the memorial on Earth, where his name was written among the heroes. Flowers from 100 worlds lay at its base, offerings from those who had been saved by his choice. And sometimes, when she stood there alone, she could almost hear his voice again, steady and full of quiet fire. "You don't let bullies win." In that moment, she always smiled through her tears, because even though Jack Rayner was gone, his spirit had become part of the stars themselves, a reminder that courage is not born from power, but from heart. And as long as people remembered to stand up and say "not today," humanity would never truly fall.